So this presentation is my favorite one that I give because it involves a little bit of yield trials and picking some varieties and some of my opinions. What we're going to cover here is some grain trials, net returns by crop, and then thoughts for next season on opportunities, challenges, things like that. You probably saw in some of our social media or emails that we did try some winter peas for a few years, and they kind of looked good through the winter. I think we tried these 3 times. And so it was a yellow pea, and it looked good through the winter, but it just never made it out of the spring alive. The roots kind of just died off, so I think we're done with that, at least for now. Maybe it's an ultra early seeding kind of thing where it would be a fit, actually. But for now, that idea has kind of died. Our pea demo plots, they kind of died. We kind of had some dips in the field. You can kind of see where some had more of a dip in other plots. So we ended up mowing these plots out because we ended up putting too much water there because they were next to the faba beans. So if we had placed this in a pea field, we would have been much better off. But our pea demos, it would have been way too random, so we ended up mowing them out. And it was kind of too much rain and then watering like a faba bean at the wrong time, because they were planted way after the faba beans were. So next year we'll have a better plan. So that was the failures. We'll move on from there. In our grain trials, so this takes a ton of work, but we learned so much, and we kick varieties out of our program and we add varieties in really fast because of some of these demo plots that we do. It's a 7.5 inch spacing. We use a double disc box drill, so we can't really go into no-till situations very easily. So often we're doing tillage. So maybe a little different situation, but the goal is high plant populations, PGRs and fungicides. So we can treat these trials kind of like how we farm and most of our irrigation customers would farm. And one challenge we had is we ended up getting manipulator. The plan was for Motus, but manipulator got used on the plots, so the barley plots lodged more than they should have. And so I've got a plan for next year on how we're going to change that a little bit and maybe separate the barley from the wheat a little bit so that they don't get sprayed together. But we had a lot of barley lodging, which impacted our numbers a little bit. There's a picture of the field. It was planted late May because we were doing some seed canola ahead of time and then moved on with that drill to this. Everything kind of got delayed, and then this field got delayed, and it had kind of a wet spot through that field, as you can see. Those were the plots from the opposite direction. Barley's on the left there, very lodged. And so if we had a different PGR on there, it probably would have helped things a little bit. Kind of the highlights from this for standability. The Stanza stood probably the best. Bill Coors was maybe second, and then Sirish and Esma were very close to it as well for standability in our whole plots. We did try a couple new European varieties, and they were good, but probably no different than some of the ones we're growing. We tried Planet and Asteroid, and they were fine, but I'm not sure if it makes sense to jump into them necessarily. Stanza yielded above the other ones, but it stood well. So here we kind of had a yield by lodging, really. And maybe the combine couldn't quite pick them up. The way we picked these up is with a 40-foot header taking 10 feet at a time. And we just go take 10 feet and then 10 feet. So there is risk we couldn't pick everything up quite properly when we went to harvest this. And because we go and weigh each plot. And it's not replicated, it's not science, it's just farmer side by sides. The Bill Coors 100, the Dram, surprisingly, the AB Dram, which I didn't think would yield kind of like the rest, Fraser, they all yielded very similarly, and really Stanza was the main one above the rest. When it came to Durham, the Succeed and Stronghold stood the best. Vanta was great as well, but it was so late. I just talked to someone here earlier, and they said they liked the grading of the Vanta, maybe a touch less on yield, but the grading was better. So something to consider there. Obviously this year in Durham, grade made a big amount of money difference. And so from a 2 to a 3, I mean, that makes you some money on a year like this. But really, Succeed being early, we like that, and then Standability, Succeed and Stronghold and Vanta were very good. On our seed production fields, the Schrader actually did the best for top end yield. We were close to 110 bushel averages down in Hayes actually. but that, some of that land is pretty even, so, and a little heavier land, so it did really well down there, and we did have some lodging on there as well, even with a PGR. But yeah, the Succeed and the Stronghold were kind of winners in these plots, but seed production field wise, we kind of had the Schrader that led the pack, so a little different results there. And then with wheats, the Manus, so we had 4 varieties that kind of yielded similarly. So last year the Manus won our yield trials by quite a bit, but we had some stress due to a late PGR, so maybe it handles stress a little differently. This year the Manus, Wheatland, Hockley, and were very similar. So the Stoughton, which comes up next year, and Wheatland, Hockley, and Manus were similar, and West King was our highest yielding wheat, which launches next year. So that's exciting, but it's only 1 year, so it's hard to say, okay, that's the one, until we see some more information next year and other trials to compare to our trial. For standability, Manus and Wheatland and Hockley were kind of the best standards out of what we're selling right now. But really for next year, the Oakman, West King, and Stoughton all stood better than everything else. So they're like the next step in standability, and I think in some yield as well. So next year's going to be a big launch for new spring wheats. As far as yield, the West King, it topped kind of the next 4 that were in line there. Oakman was a little bit lower, but I mean, that's more of a solid cent per dryland. But yeah, West King did a little bit better than everything else. Soft wheats and triticales for grain. The one plot, they all stood really well, and we had fairly similar results amongst all of the varieties this year. And typically we've had differences in lodging. Typically the Awesome is going to lay down a little bit easier than the rest, and this year we didn't really see any differences. One surprising one, that T326 triticale, a big yield there, but that one's not even licensed, like it's not available in the marketplace yet. Looked good in our trials, so maybe it's something that will eventually come along and replace like the Sunbeam, but Sunbeam's the newest spring trip for grain, and fairly comparable to all the soft wheats, so no real clear winners, but yeah, eventually I'm thinking Galore will replace the Paramount and the Sedash. And then the grain for the hybrid fall rise, fall trits, and winter wheats for grain. So these were seeded September 20th, and the hybrid's at 1 unit, so that's 23 plants per square foot. The winter wheat and trit were at 40, but one of the plots, like you saw with Blair, was lower plant population, and it did better in this case as well. And so depending on the pricing, I actually should have done that, and done a yield by price and compared the fall rise to the winter wheats. I think you end up with pretty comparable results here with net returns between those. But it does show that the fall rise are yielding more than the trits and winter wheats for grain, even on irrigation. These plots had manipulator applied to them, but there was actually no fungicide applied, so it was kind of planned, but it never actually happened at the right time. It's really hard to plan a fungicide when you've got trits or fall rise heading and flowering way over here, and you've got winter wheat way over here, like there's weeks apart in flower timing, so a little harder to kind of plan fungicides on those. Any questions on the demo plots and some of that I just went over before I move on to the next topic? Okay, my plan for next year is actually to split the plots where I do a PGR on one half and I do a no PGR on the other half, so we can really rate standability differently versus PGR with or without, but then it doubles the amount we have to harvest into wagons, so we'll see about that. And so net returns by crop, so we might all have to start selling small square bales if things don't work out, but it's a good workout. That's my family, they're hauling some flax bales. When I did, cost, so this is irrigated cost per acre when I plug in all different crops and seed costs and what it comes out to. So you're kind of between $225 an acre to $300 an acre in cost to plant that crop, not including land rent or your payments or your machinery costs or things like that. So cost of production, relatively high, you all know that. And then corn, you're up in that $350 an acre kind of range. And you know, what matters, how does it compare to other crops? What's your net return percentage based on what the market is? The biggest challenge is placing, like the prices is a little easier, but the yield, how do you place a yield? Who farms differently than the next person? You know, they're a better durum grower, you're a better barley grower. So it's challenging to place a yield in there, and then, you know, I compared it to wheat. So what's my net return compared to wheat? When I look at the feed wheat price compared to the CWS price, it kind of makes sense to maybe grow more of a feed wheat situation if it can yield 10% more, 15% more. We'll see what Terrence has to say about that. You know, winter crops look pretty good, but a little bit late for that right now. That's a next year thing. Barley surprisingly looks okay. Mustard's okay. Corn looks okay. I might have priced corn a little bit too low though. I priced it at $6. I didn't have an oversight when I made this one up. But yeah, relatively speaking, there is a lot of good crops to grow, but usually I get asked, okay, I'm growing wheat, what else could I put in that acre? Wheat seems to be the one people are always kicking at and changing something out for wheat, it seems like. But then they never do it, so they just grow wheat again. I don't have chickpeas on irrigation in this chart. That one I didn't figure. I'll learn that by next year. And then dryland costs. So you're looking at, you know, $124 an acre to $200 an acre, depending what you're putting on that dryland. So obviously, you know, that's a high number. And net returns. In this chart for yields, if you told me when the rain was going to come next year, is it going to come in May and June, or is it going to be super dry through the spring and the rain's going to come more July and August? Then I'm going to put different yield numbers in here, and that's going to totally change what you should grow. So really, and we have had some years like that where it was a really dry spring and winter wheats didn't do well, but yeah, how do you place a yield in there in southern Alberta? It's so difficult because it's just the timing and the length of the crop. When are you going to get rain? When aren't you? These charts, they went out in the email that went out yesterday. These charts were in that email that came from us. If you didn't get them, contact Blair or myself. We can get these charts to you. I'm going to put them in our blog on our website, but we can forward that email to you that had these charts in them if you want to see these charts. And really, these are to compare to your own numbers. I mean, your numbers are going to be different, so this is just to compare to what you're doing on your farm. Any questions on the net return charts before I move on? Canola. Yeah, it doesn't look, yeah, I think because the cost is high, and I put a yield number in there that is maybe right or wrong compared to everything else. I don't know. But yeah, it doesn't look that great in those charts. But I mean, the cost to grow it, not cheap, right? But did I put a too low of a yield in relative to the other crops? That could be it too. Okay, thoughts for next season. That's my hand in that picture. Maybe I could make money selling pictures of my hand. Chad's a buyer. Changes for this year. So new in 2024. So we added some bins. We added 20 of the 7,500 bushel bins, and we added 10 of the 4,000 bushel bins. Thanks to Matt and team that got those going late in the fall there. And you know, for us, surprisingly, the fullest time, the time our bins are the fullest is actually in that January to March period. So it's not actually typically at harvest time, it's that January to March, because we have some contract growers that do grow some seed for us to retail. And in certain situations, we don't have the land or the capacity, and just put that many varieties through a combine, it just becomes too much of a no-go, really. You just can't do that. So we do get a little bit of help. So our busiest time is that January till March. So this was to help alleviate that pressure until a big amount of the seed gets shipping. I mean, we're shipping seed right now. We were going to ship some today, but Blair pushed them off. It was a trucking company that wanted to come and get some seed. I use some charts like this sometimes, but I wanted to put a little disclaimer about that too. So I'm contradicting myself from earlier, sorry. This one is barley varieties. Well, some areas, say the Highway 2 corridor, they're going to grow a different variety. You know, there'll be a variety that's more well grown in that corridor. Well, it's going to shift what the yields look like in the province, because it's grown under a wetter conditions in Highway 2 corridor than it is maybe in the special areas or in the south here. So just get some food for thought when it comes to looking at yields and charts and things like that. Things can get skewed pretty easily just based on where something's growing, so keep that in mind. Blends, Blair talked about that a little bit. So a lot are blending with their spring crops, blending a fall forage crop in there for fall grazing, spring grazing, and early silage, things like that. Typically that's on dry land where they don't want to go in and they want something established. So irrigation, they're more apt to reseed and rewater that field. And yeah, so lots of different options depending on what your weed control program is. The way we blend them is we transfer a number of times. So we'll load these wagons that have load cells and we'll transfer back and forth, and it's farmer style blending. So we get the right weights in there, but it's transferred back and forth for blending. Covers, that's a dry bean field from a few years ago. They went windrowed and then they went and planted in between so they could get some soil erosion protection established, and they didn't get that field picked up right away, and the crop actually came up. And then the field on the right there, that's a hybrid fall rye seed production field that we put on lentil stubble. So you can see the lentil stubble there, very little disturbance, so that was planted, the fall rye was planted September 12th, and the picture taken November 1st. So it's amazing how fast a fall crop can really fill in there. There was a lot of lodging, and thanks to Matt Gosling on the tour this spring, we had some questions about that, and Matt was giving some ideas. So some of these are stolen from Matt. You know, was there more fertility remaining in the soil this spring versus in more available this spring than expected? So that could be something why we saw more lodging in crops this year, especially in irrigation. And you know, those are both barleys that had Motus applied to them, and kind of a normal plant stand for us, but more lodging than we expected. And then the demo plots, you know, I was surprised to see some of the lower plant populations doing better than the higher plots, which has kind of been what I've been you know, pro high plant populations generally. So maybe I need to relook at some of that a little bit, but typically a fan of high plant populations. Had some customers using manipulator on barley. Yes.
Are you soil testing grades, Greg?
No, we've got a variable rate VR and zones based on different areas of the field, so zones in the field. So not soil testing based on grades, no. And then manipulator on barley, if you're going to use a PGR, use Motus. I had a couple customers that were like, oh, my barley laid down more than normal. Well, they had changed the PGR they were using, and I'm like, well, shouldn't have done that. But their agronomist said, well, let's try this one, and it wasn't a good fit because they had lodging and then lighter bushel weights. And lower plant populations. So I think we're going to drop our suggested plant populations on some of these European or American varieties and go back. You know, when we first started growing Bill Coors 100, we were doing 20 plants per square foot. We've kind of crept up to 25 to 30 with us and some customers. I think we kind of start going back down again, which kind of is counterintuitive to what I was always thinking, but it seems like that can help with lodging risk and bushel weights. Dormant seeding, so trying to copy a little bit of what Dr. Brian Barris was doing. So this was planted November 18th, so we did hard red spring wheat, a durum, and a barley. And I was surprised how long it took the soil temperatures to actually drop and stay dropped. So November 18th is when they actually went and planted it, just ahead of a big snowstorm. And we've got one of these cool crop intelligence probes in the field. And actually the most cool thing that I found with it is they put Catherine's here, at the back there. So if you want some more information on them, talk to her. But the coolest thing I had was the soil temperature probe in there. So it's buried at 2 inches, give or take 2 inches. And that soil never went below -1. Through all this -20 weather, the soil at 2 inches never went below -1 actually, and now it's creeping back up. And then we actually saw a moisture event when the snowmelt went into the soil. There's a moisture sensor still in the soil over winter. So we're going to talk about this more at our June meeting. We're going to have her come and talk and go over what we've learned in the fall crop plots. It's kind of new for them and us. But it's been really fun watching the soil temperature actually. Yes? That N is already put on. Yeah, because it's in a fall crop demo plot. So it's in a hybrid rye plot right now. So the moisture probe's in, it might have to get repositioned in the spring, but, so right now it's still measuring soil moisture, and there's actually the next one, I got a cool chart on it for you. But yeah, it was so cool to watch the soil temperatures not really drop at all. But we had good snow cover there, right? But just watching, and then that dot on the right-hand side of that chart there, that was the snow melt from a few days ago when that soil moisture is going into the soil. So that's the moisture sensor picking up that snow melt that went into the soil. So it says it's detecting, I think 15, 16 millimeters of soil moisture that came from that snow melt going into that plot. So it's been really cool to watch, really cool to learn. This is the first moisture probe like this that we've had on our farm. I think we have lots to learn about irrigation timing and crop needs. So. And fall crops, like how do we manage fall crops better if we have water? Different crops, so what are some different crops we could grow this year? Faba bean, we talked about that a little bit already. Lentils, I mean, green lentil sales have been pretty strong. How many green lentils can we grow in Canada? I mean, maybe Saskatchewan's drought impacted yields of green lentils in general. Alberta's not a big grower of greens, but it seems like we're gaining acres. But lentil acres in Alberta are climbing every year. The chickpea program, I'm actually hoping to get Ken and group to come talk at Ag Expo again, to a bit more of an agronomy and contracting session at Ag Expo, but that's not sorted out. That was just talked about at lunchtime here, so nothing set in stone. Flax, yellow is worth more than brown right now. Is the price of flax at $17 right now relative to canola? Is that a good enough price for you to grow flax over canola? I don't know. If you have gophers, the gophers don't eat flax like they do canola, so that could be good for a gopher field. I love fall crops, always, but it's challenging for logistics to get your drills and people in the field at harvest time. I know that. Mustard, if you have a clean field and you haven't had canola in a long time on a field, that could be an option. I love the spring trits versus soft wheats, where you're in a drought or more of a moisture situation where you got to conserve a little bit more and spread your risk. The feed wheats, we talked about that, and the malt barley. Usually those malt barley contracts are reasonable. We didn't talk about this time. This winter, there's Randy Kuchar has a report coming out really testing varieties over the last 2 years for bacterial blight risk. So that should come out sometime this winter. I'll probably link to it in a customer email over the winter here once I see it. So if you don't get our emails, we can get you signed up. There's always something interesting in those emails. At least I think so. I write them. But it seems like some varieties are less prone to it. So yeah, is there something to the bacterial blight issue? Seems like Durhams are more prone, and we feel like we've seen some spring wheats with some different tolerances to it. And just because you have a test for bacterial blight doesn't mean you're going to have that impact on your crop. It just doesn't seem to be correlated at all. It's so much environmental, and it's kind of everywhere, really. And then seed treatment. Blair had this picture sent to him, and it was seed treated winter wheat. So we had sent some seed to a customer, and they said, well, can you leave some untreated? And so we had some that was untreated and some that had a fungicide insecticide. It was a full leaf stage ahead with a tiller, and this was side by side seeded at the same time. So it was seeded September 7th, and the picture was October 16th. I was really surprised to see that difference in advancement in the fall crop. So something to keep in mind when you're planting a fall crop. But I love seed treatments on fall crops. And so, lots of customers across a wide area having issues with wheat stem sawfly. So variety-wise, we've got Adamant right now for a spring wheat, and then we've got Stronghold or Grainland. Grainland better when it's really, really dry, which is typically our area. And I think some other agronomic things, seeding earlier, we had some soft wheat on dryland a few years ago that was soft wheat on soft wheat, same variety, so we could do that. And I thought we were gonna have a big wreck with sawfly, but it was seeded so early and harvested so early, we didn't really have that wreck with the sawfly. So we were able to get in there without any cutting or issues. So maybe that was just luck, But I think early seeding or these fall crops don't seem to be impacted by that sawfly as much either. So whether it's stem or timing, I'm not sure. Moisture conservation, that's still maybe a concern in some irrigation districts where you're a little light on potential irrigation. People are changing how they're doing things, how they're harvesting, how they're seeding, and growing a little bit different crops just to conserve moisture in the districts where they are a little tighter. Rye and trits would have more of a scavenger root system. Nearing the end here, clean seed that's ready to ship. If you want to pick one of these things up, they are ready to go or are currently being tested after cleaning. Just so in case you want to get something home early. We do have our early pay discounts on now. Talk to Blair about that. Because of the Canada Post strike, you can set us up as a payee in online banking so that you can pay for seed just the way you would pay your electricity bill on online banking. And we do have FCC crop input financing if you would like to use that. For in-person events this year, we're going to be at Ag Expo. The big arrow is pointing, our booth is moved down the hallway a little bit, so we're kind of middle of the hallway for our booth down here, and then we're going to have a seed event over in this area during Ag Expo. And then, of course, our fall crop tour and our main summer tour. Okay, questions? It's got to be something from all that. If not, you get Mr. Doom and Gloom Terrence over here, so. So.
Yeah.
He's a realist, he'll tell you that. Any questions?
I'll make Greg present for me.
Hey, Terrence is gonna come back, I'm giving him too hard of a time. Okay, if there's no questions, then I'll, yes?
How viable do you think that chickpea thing is?
How viable is the chickpea thing?
What these two gentlemen talked about here?
Yeah. Well, Ken and Sarah are still in the room, so I gotta say, yes, it's amazing. But, well, I don't know where the yield is gonna be, right? Like, so Ken's yield numbers were in that 30 bushel range. Well, dryland, southern Alberta, I mean, we're not gonna get 10 inches of water typically, right? So how, either, is it on irrigation, but we maintain better quality somehow? I don't know, that might take some figuring out. But dryland, yeah, how much cost per acre to the returns? Like, what's your yield gonna be relative to your other crops? Can it spread your risk? If you have aminophyces, or you wanna stretch that pulse rotation from lentils or peas, that's a really good way to do it as well. Net returns, I mean, relative to the other crops, it looks fine, and the market is very different from the other crops. So the risk, I think, and maybe Terrence talked to this too, but what is the risk to India closing its doors to certain pulses, or China closing its doors to certain pulses, right? So can you spread your risk on your farm into other markets like Europe that aren't going to be as politically motivated to do things? I think that's a big advantage. But yeah, don't do every acre, but do a few fields. That'd be my suggestion.
That's kind of where I went with the question, because I thought the seed cost wasn't bad.
That's amazing. Let's do 1,000 acres. You can sign the contract back there with Ken, and we'll get the seed set up. So I mean the chickpea thing. I mean, if a few people decide that that's something they want to try on their farm to spread some risk or change up their rotation or harvest timings, I mean I think it's an opportunity. So I do think chickpea acres in Alberta are lower than they probably could be. So I think there's a lot of room for growth for chickpeas in Alberta.
The one year we got burned at LA Grant.
Okay.
Wasn't LA Grant, was Bismarck Pacific. Like 100 years. We lost a lot of money.
Okay.
He said here that they would not be certified or bonded until the end of March.
Yeah, so the comment was on risk of a buyer. So they were going to be licensed and bonded for March, so they would be licensed and bonded for the season you'll be contracting your grain in and when you get paid in. So they will be licensed and bonded is for the crop that you'll be contracting with them. But talk to them about that, because I'm just providing seed. I'm not the market expert on chickpea by any means. So buyer or contractor, beware as with anything you sell or contract. So thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Greg, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, we need the tough questions, because I mean I'm selling to you guys, you are selling to them and Terrence and right, so like, you have to make money for me to make money, so, good question. Yes?
What's your opinion or outlook on maple peas?
Maple peas, yeah, we're gonna grow some seed and no one's gonna buy it. That's my main. No, I think we're gonna get another year out of it because there was not much seed out there. I just don't know if there's gonna be enough seed to really do the maple pea market what it needs to do for this next year. And if there's some drought risk again across the prairies, same, you know, that'll also make it worse. But there's just not a lot of maple pea seed out there, period. So I think we get one more year of the maple peas before we're dead, but yeah. Well, it's one of those things, right? You grow them and then maple peas, it goes up and then it drops for a few years and drops off for nothing. And buyers are very specific on what variety they want. And when the prices are high, they don't care. When they're low, they're really picky. So, yeah. So I think we're gonna get another couple years out of maple peas, but could be wrong. We're growing some seed, so my opinion is we're gonna get one more chance to sell you some maple pea seed.